Hi, my name is Christopher Malcolm. I'm a Los Angeles-based lifestyle, fitness, and activewear photographer. I shoot mainly commercial work, so clients and athletic brands who are trying to market their products. That's where I come in. One thing I don't usually do a lot of are camera reviews. But a couple months ago, I put up a review of, or an initial review of the Fuji GFX 100 camera. And I kind of talked a little bit about why I purchased it, what was behind that decision. And I know it got a lot of interest, so I thought it might be nice to follow it up with another one where after 3 months of actually using the camera as a professional photographer, what have I liked, what have I disliked, and really just give you like a hands-on impression of the camera. So it won't be all praise, it won't be all bad, it'll just be kind of somewhere in between. It'll be my thoughts on actually using the camera in the field. So this is the camera we're talking about. This is the Fuji GFX 100. It's a medium format camera with a 102 megapixel sensor. This camera, while it looks like a DSLR, is really more in the vein of, it's closer to something like a Hasselblad or a Phase 1 if you've ever shot with any of those cameras. Although the sensor's slightly smaller, but it's still, for all intents and purposes, medium format camera. 102 megapixels, so yeah, there's a lot of detail. Before I begin the review, I'd also want to point out something that should be kind of obvious, but isn't always. And that is that, gear is important as a photographer, but it's not the most important thing. While yes, tools do help, I think it's important to realize that, great photographers, and I'm not necessarily calling myself a great photographer, but great photographers have been taking wonderful images for years, long before things like dual pixel autofocus or high-speed sync or mirrorless camera. So if you have, if all you can afford is an iPhone, make a great picture with an iPhone. There's no such thing as a perfect camera for everybody. That doesn't exist. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. Depending on what you shoot, depending on how you shoot, depending on how your images are used, there are several different camera options for you. I won't completely go back and rehash, the why I bought the camera argument, because that's in my previous video, which I'll link in the description. But the reason why I mainly bought the camera in kind of bullet points were, one, I love Fuji cameras. I've owned the X Pro one, the X 100S, and then the XT3, which is pretty much my favorite camera of all time. I love that camera so much that essentially I spent a good bit of time looking for a camera with a larger sensor that could replicate that. For a couple months, I actually was renting or was loaned the Fuji 50S, and I love that so much. And it kind of got to some of the points of being able to kind of bring my XT3 shooting experience into my work, into a sensor size that I needed, so that when they announced the 100 megapixel, I was like, yeah, sign me up. I shoot, I said, mostly advertising work. So what that means is that, there's large crews, large budgets. When I'm shooting, for the most part, I shoot athletes or people or fitness models or athletes. So people who are moving very fast and showing off the product in kind of aspirational imagery. So a lot of the time, the reason why I end up using medium format is really for my clients. The images that I take, some of them end up online, but a lot of them are really meant for not only billboards, because you can kind of get away with a lot of stuff with billboards because billboards are far away, but a lot of them are also for like in-store displays. So, a customer is standing in Foot Locker and they see a Nike ad, and the ad is, printed really big and it's like 3 feet from their face. So you need to have a lot of resolution for that. Whereas a billboard is hundreds of feet away, and you can kind of, up close, they don't look great. Whereas, the stuff that actually has to look good up close. The other thing that you have to keep in mind when you're shooting commercial photography is it's not always, oh, I just take this great picture and they take the whole frame and they put it into the final layout. It's going to be cropped in multiple ways. So basically, the more resolution I have, the better. Now, if I was only shooting pictures that were going to end up in social media, for example, 100 megapixels definitely be overkill. I shoot a lot of people who are moving in fast motion. So people are very rarely completely stationary. If you're a photographer who's, for example, shooting still lifes, landscapes, things that don't move, then some of this is not going to necessarily apply to you. And a lot of it's going to apply to everybody. But just kind of get that out of the way so you know where I'm coming from. For any of you who watched my previous video or have read any of my essays on f-stoppers, you know that once I get going, I could talk for a little while. So if you're just for like one specific thing, if you just want to know about like autofocus or you just want to know about resolution, something like that, I will put actually a timestamp in the description so that you'll be able to skip ahead to what it is that you're most interested in. Now, I think it may also be important to point out that I am a professional photographer and I'm not a professional YouTuber. So this might be a little less fancy than you're used to. I apologize for that. So what I'm really looking to do is give you guys a real unvarnished look at what it's like to shoot with this camera professionally, warts and all. So this will not be like a puff piece. I won't be just telling you how much I love the camera, nor will it be a bash piece telling you how much I hate the camera. A little spoiler alert. It's a great camera, not a perfect camera, which I think you could probably say for pretty much every camera on the market. So without further ado, let's get into the review. Should you buy the GFX 100? Next question. No, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, it'll depend greatly on kind of what you shoot and how you shoot. So I can't answer that specifically for you. But hopefully the next couple sections will give you an idea, some hints that you'll be able to apply to your form of shooting and see if it will work for you. Who is the GFX 100 for? I think there are several questions you have to ask yourself before deciding whether or not you're going to purchase the Fuji GFX 100. The first and biggest question is, are you going to print your work? The reason why you get 100 megapixels isn't because your work is going to suddenly start looking like Annie Leibovitz because you have 100 megapixels versus 10 megapixels. That's not how photography works. Where 100 megapixels is really going to help you is in printing and in cropping. If you are somebody who never crops and everything is exactly kind of within frame and you're not shooting commercially, so you don't have clients who are going to alter the crop after the fact, and so you can get everything you want in that frame right then and there all the time, that's maybe a strike against purchasing the GFX 100. If you're someone whose pictures only end up on Instagram or Facebook or social media, no reason in the world to spend $10,000 on a 100 megapixel camera. I'll tell you a good story. The other day I was doing a shoot with the GFX 100. It was a fitness shoot for a series I was creating called Lean On Me. And I was using continuous light because I was doing still and motion. So I was, I'm a photographer and a director, and I was doing still and motion. So I'm doing the whole setup with my GFX 100. Then in between takes, it's kind of like the scene is like, it's like a boxing kind of scene. And there's a female model and she's wrapping her hands and she's doing all this stuff and she's getting ready, right? So in between takes, as the model herself behind the scenes, she's wrapping her hands, she's getting ready for the shot. I happened to notice that where she was standing was just perfect, and I wanted to just grab this shot. Being excited, I just ran over and started shooting. Well, I ran off about 7 or 8 frames before I realized that the camera I was holding in my hand at the time was the X100S, which is like a 16 megapixel, kind of point and shoot. It's an awesome kind of pocket camera. But I brought it to do some behind the scenes shots. That's the reason I was holding it, because I was trying to do some behind the scenes shots. And I noticed, and I started I was like, oh, that's a great shot. And I ran up and I started taking it. And it took about 6 or 7 frames. I realized, I'm like, idiot, you're holding the wrong camera. So I put that down, and I pick up the GFX 100, and I come back and I shoot it with that. And, the shot turned out well. I'm very happy with it. But it's interesting because now I have basically 2 roughly identical shots of the same situation shot with both cameras. I wasn't trying to set up a camera comparison, so it wasn't like it was completely official. But it was, basically the same situation, same cameras with similar settings. And so when I got home and I got to capture one and I started to kind of do my edit, I intentionally pulled that image from the 16 megapixel camera out to compare it side by side with that of the 100 megapixel camera. And I'll be honest, it kind of looked exactly the same. If you look at them on on a small screen, if you're looking at them on a small computer screen. So again, if the entire purpose of that image was only to end up on social media or something like that, there's no reason you need 100 megapixels. The benefit obviously comes in once you then start to zoom in and just keep zooming in deeper and deeper and deeper into the image, at which point you will quickly realize that, the 16 megapixels is going to break down a lot quicker than 100 megapixels. And, if to be able to print that series, which is something that I would print, the 100 megapixels is going to come in, quite handy, being able to print to whatever size, as well as create multiple crops of each image. If you're a fine art photographer and you're going to be making rather large prints, one of the things that I have not yet gotten a chance to do with this camera, but I'm really looking forward to, is doing like just a standalone kind of portrait project. Because I love when I walk into a gallery and I can see, prints of people that are like life size, like just huge prints. And that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to doing with this camera, is being able to, take those pictures where you really get to see a person and you see every detail, every pore, there's everything about this person, and really reveal this person through your image. And that will be like the perfect kind of application for a camera like this. Or again, if you're doing landscapes, and you've got this beautiful view of the valley and you want to see every little detail, rolling hills, and then you want to take it into a gallery, print it nice and big, or print it for yourself, you want to print it nice and big and just put it against the wall so that, people can almost feel like they can walk into the image. This is absolutely the camera for you in that situation. Photography is not about having the most expensive gear all the time. It's about light and composition and your subject matter and the interaction with your subject. The gear that you pick it just helps facilitate that, and it helps you do your job, but it's not the job in and of itself. Now allow me a second just to counter the point I just made. When does 100 megapixels come in handy? So again, a lot of the times when I'm working for a client, the client will be using the images that I shoot in a multitude of ways. I'll create a hero image. That image will eventually end up being square on Instagram. It may be printed very large and horizontal on a billboard. Let's say the characters are standing, or the subjects are standing to one side of the frame. They may very well crop that into like an 8x10, and then print that big, for a large poster in store or on a package. So the images that I create are going to go multiple ways. So in the previous story where I was talking about, the 16 megapixel camera out of my point and shoot, that is great because it was only going to ever be like that. But if I needed to start cropping that image, horizontally then vertically, I'm down to 7 or 8 megapixels, and your clients are not really going to be able to print that. So where 100 megapixels really comes in is it gives your clients a lot of options. Every image I'm creating now, I'm finding multiple ways to cut that image. And it just makes each image more valuable, and it makes each image more usable in a commercial sense. Obviously the ideal is, as a photographer, is to make sure you get everything you need to get in camera. But for clients, sometimes clients don't always know exactly what they want. Again, my job is to make my clients happy. So from that standpoint, I'm able to provide my clients a little bit more flexibility than I would be able to otherwise. Take this image here, for example, from the series I shot called 11 Women. So it's a fairly simple, straightforward image of a model. She's laying there in a tub. Why is she in a tub? I don't know, but it looked cool. There's a wide image, which itself is very, very, is great. But then if you push further in, here's an example of that same image, and you see that this is just detail, just the belt line. So from that wide image to this tight image, that's all the same image. All I've done is I've just cropped in. Because you got 100 megapixels, you can crop and keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. If you're a client, you've essentially gotten 2 photo shoots, or 2 photos for the price of 1. If you want to punch in and show product detail, you can just do that within the same frame. So it gives, again, the client a great deal of flexibility to kind of maximize each shot. It does change a little bit about the way you're thinking when you're shooting, which is something, to think about. But it's a benefit. It's a legit benefit to your customers. So who is the camera not for? Me. Okay, I kid. Sort of. Okay, so here's the thing. If you shoot fast moving subjects, specifically subjects that move somewhat erratically, this may or may not be the perfect camera for you. For example, I'm not like a sideline reporter. Like, you're not gonna see me on the sideline of a game shooting, but I shoot athletes. I shoot people who are moving very, very fast. So, generally working on a studio, or we're starting on a set, or somehow it's a somewhat controlled environment. So I have some idea of where these people are gonna go sometimes, but I also like to let them move. I like to let them play. As a director, as a photographer, getting the most out of your subject is job number one. And for me personally, the way I work, I like to kind of create room for my subjects to play, to kind of go and be free. I find the more you tell a model, okay, you have to hit this exact mark every time, the more you tell them, okay, you have to do it exactly like this, you have to stand exactly like there, your arm has to go exactly like. The more you do that, the more the model gets into their head, the more stiff and wooden images look. Same thing with an athlete. An athlete, they use their bodies. They're used to being free. They're used to kind of moving. And so my job is really to kind of prime them to get their best performance out of them, then to be able to keep up with them with the camera. So I kind of need a camera that can keep up with them. And this camera struggles to do that for two really basic reasons, but two big reasons. So you should keep this in mind if you shoot fast moving subjects. So the main there's one light reason why it can't do it, and then there's one very, very challenging issue for where it struggles. So the first part is just autofocus. So the GFX 100 has the same autofocusing system as the XT3, which you guys would realize, it's a fantastic autofocusing system. So the sensor is really great at kind of being able to keep track of where people are and keep them in frame. The only thing is that the lens is for surely just the reason, because they're big, huge, this is not a small lens. And there's a lot of motors, a lot of stuff that has to move in order to make that happen. So the lenses themselves they can't track focus quite quickly make all those micro adjustments needed to track focus quite quickly enough to keep up with a subject that's moving super duper fast. So for that reason, I generally end up having to either instead of being in continuous mode, shoot in single point autofocus, and just kind of focus and recompose, focus and recompose, focus and recompose, which, by the way, is exactly how I shoot when I shoot with the Hasselblad or the Phase 1. So it's still ahead of those cameras in that regard. It's just because of the form factor of this camera, a lot of times, we tend to want to compare it to a DSLR. And I know a lot of you are probably shooting DSLRs, so I want to kind of give you some kind of perspective there. Comparing it to its competitors who don't even really mess around with, where I wouldn't even try to mess around with, continuous focus. You're basically back to the kind of focus, recompose, focus, recompose, focus, recompose. Or what I do a lot of times is I'll just manually focus. One thing that this camera does have that's actually very good are all the manual focus capabilities, the zebra patterns, all the different forms of previewing your manual focus. Makes it quite easy to shoot with manual focus. And this is coming from somebody, I'm blind as a bat. I can't, I never do manual focus I used to never do manual focus because I just don't trust my eyes. But the focus assist tools in this camera are actually really, really good. So when I'm shooting somebody moving quickly, I generally now resort to either focus, recompose, or to manually focusing. So while it has continuous autofocus, if your subjects are really on the go, I don't know that that's the first thing I would go to. The main problem that really is my biggest itch that this camera hasn't been able to scratch, and it's something that I did not realize. It's one of those things that I'll take some personal responsibility, because it's one of those things that I feel like I should have known before I got the camera, but it just never came up. Primarily because I came from shooting DSLRs. So, I have mirrorless cameras. Like I have an XT3, I have, the aforementioned the X100S. So I have medium format cameras. But most of my heavy duty professional work I've always done on DSLRs, specifically like a Nikon D850 or medium format DSLRs like, the Hasselblad or the Phase 1, neither of which are mirrorless. And one thing that this thing has that I'm learning is a trait of a lot of mirrorless cameras is Viewfinder Blackout. I do not like Viewfinder Blackout. Yes, technically in the optical viewfinder, your lens, the mirror still has to go up and down, so you will get a section where it kind of blacks out for a second, but it happens so quickly that I never see it. I never even notice it happening. Versus this camera has a very pronounced, like when you hit that shutter, that thing is. And in actuality, if you were to have it with a stopwatch, it's probably only a couple milliseconds more than my Nikon. But when you're shooting people who are moving very fast, a couple of milliseconds can be a lot. So for example, let's take a case where, I'm shooting an athlete and they've got to run from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. So, this is something that's frequent. I shoot stuff like this all the time. So let's just say, for our hypothetical case, that we're shooting on a 9-foot seamless, and they're gonna run from the right side of the seamless to the left side of the seamless, and let's say it'll take them 3 steps to get across. Just hypothetical, right? So in practice, what I need to be able to do is I need to be able to get off probably at least 3 frames within that time frame. So I'll probably try to get, depending on what product it is I'm advertising, let's just say it's shorts and the logo's here. So I want to try to get off, 3 frames when the knee's at its height, right? And so that does a couple different things. One, it gives me multiple options. And 2, it means that I get off 3 shots for every time the model has to make that run once. Because models, great athletes or not, they get tired. So you don't want to just have them just doing that all the time. So you want to try to get as much bang for your buck when you're shooting, right? Again, with the focus, I would probably manually focus and do the distance that way. Or, I could focus and recompose focus, but I'll probably manually focus. But here's the problem with the Viewfinder Blackout being just that split second longer. If I take the first shot and the knee's at its height, that's great. Now I've got to still be watching. I still got to be watching this athlete and ready for that second knee, right? But with the Viewfinder Blackout, I don't know what's happening until it comes back. Then it comes back and the second knee is already come and gone. Then now I'm hoping to try to get the third one. I'm trying to reorient myself, and maybe I catch the third one. It just happens too quickly versus how long the blackout is. So basically, in order for me to see through the viewfinder again, be reoriented to capture that perfect moment, maybe I can get 2 out of the 3 strides in, if that. So really, in actual practice, what I'm really getting most of the time is actually just the first step. So I can essentially get one known frame off for each thing. I do have the option of going to either low burst mode or high burst mode. High burst mode for me is pretty much useless because when you go into high burst mode on the camera, it forces you into that auto preview mode. So it shows you the shot you just took until the viewfinder is available to take another shot. So it's not like you're seeing a smooth view of the person running across the screen. You're seeing a choppy picture, and that's very disoriented when you're trying to capture a whole shot inside of a split second inside of 1 second to see all these just multiple frames. It's impractical. That's with high speed burst. With low speed burst, that doesn't do that, but you still have the blackout. It does reduce the blackout a little bit because in low speed burst, it shoots at 14-bit files. Single frame, it shoots at 16-bit files, and I have noticed that the blackout is a little bit shorter when it's into 14-bit and you're shooting the low speed burst, probably because it takes less time to process the image. I'm sure that somebody can explain that better than I can, but so I end up shooting in low burst mode, but the blackout is still too long for me to really be able to have a full grasp on the second and third step. The first step, I can get that moment. But, you know, in order to get multiple frames off during that one take, it's still a little bit too of a disjointed thing. So essentially what you're going to end up doing a lot of the time, which I hate doing, is waiting for that first moment, get that first moment, and then just hold the button down, and then it'll just kind of keep shooting throughout the movement. But you've really, in that case, so you're basically spraying and praying after that first shot. And I hate spraying and praying. But essentially you have to kind of do, like, that's the only way you're going to get multiple frames off. And you have to just kind of hope that the rest of the frames catch something good, which almost never works. Yeah, it's just my least favorite thing about the camera. And it's one thing that I honestly did not think about a whole lot before I started working with it professionally. Was, you know, that timing issue. And again, I think that's really more a matter of mirrorless versus digital. As I kind of started looking for ways to fix that problem, because I didn't notice it so much on my XT3. But again, I never drove my XT3 as hard as I've been driving this. But I have been doing a little bit of research, and it seems to me that the blackout on mirrorless is just something that people are used to. I am apparently not used to that, having come from a DSLR and being used to an optical viewfinder where I can always see what's happening. And again, specifically for what I shoot, which are people moving quickly, where I need to not only be able to capture that moment, but see all the moments leading up to that moment. In order to capture that moment, blackout is a big problem. And it makes things very difficult. Of course, with that said, when I do get the right moment, oh my God, it's beautiful. So what do you do? Now, I should also point out, just to be completely fair, is that, Fuji doesn't advertise this as being a sports camera. This is not what that camera is really made to do. So I am aware that I am asking it to do something that's not necessarily on the marketing spec sheet. But again, in my line of work, because of where I land, which is somewhat between advertising and sports photography, I generally always have to end up using a medium format camera in a way that is not intended to be used. And so, you know, in the real world, again, trying to give you my real life experience, in the real world, that is a limitation. It's not impossible. But again, the downside comes from, now my models are a little bit more tired because I got to do more takes to get that moment, because I can only shoot so many shots, if not just one shot each take. So the models got to repeat the motion more. They get tired. They get more tired. It's harder to keep them happy on set. Harder to get a great shot. So these are just practical things that you have to take into consideration. If I was a conceptual photographer, if I was a portrait photographer, you know, who shot really highly art directed images, where everything is just right, the light's just right, the set is built in such a right way, and, you know, where I go in and the model's, you know, saying like this, and then tilt your chin up and just do that. And also, if I was that guy, I would have no problem at all with the autofocus, anything with the camera would be beautiful. It'll be beautiful. You know, the way I shoot, I like to kind of mix planning with a little bit of improvisation to try to get those kind of in-between moments from some of the subjects. And so sometimes, I'm working, and I see something, and I got to shoot it. Like I need to be able to just point and go, and that means that the camera's got to be able to focus quickly, shoot quickly, and boom, 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 boom. Otherwise, you miss out on the in-between moments. You can still get the hero shot where, you know, everything is carefully planned and the subjects can't move more than an inch. But those kind of like wild moments, which to me sometimes can be the magic of photography, those are harder to get with this system, I think, than a lot of the other systems I've got. So that's kind of the trade-off. But if you want like a lot of different choices in a short period of time, which this is something that I do. Like I like to produce a lot of content in a very short period of time. Something that I pride myself on. This camera will definitely slow you down and not allow you to quite produce that much content, but the content you produce will be quite good. And in the side by side, if you were to take these images into a computer and look at them next to, any other medium format camera or full frame DSLR or any other camera. I mean, on image quality alone, yeah, he wins. There's nothing. You don't have to worry about that problem at all. It's more of a usability thing. That's the only reason that I would say the camera's not necessarily built for someone like me. But again, no medium format cameras are built for someone like me. So the question is, can I make it work or not? What I was really looking forward to, what I was really trying to get out of the camera, or the reason why I purchased the camera, I was really trying to get out of it was take some of the usability of my Nikon D850 that I love, take the design and just the joy of shooting from my X-T3, take the image quality of the medium format cameras like the Hasselblad or the Phase, which I often have to rent for my productions, and try to take all those things and combine them into one camera and see if they could all take place in the same camera body. So that is a very high, very high hurdle I was proposing for my camera. It hits on a lot of those marks, and kind of comes up short on some of the marks as well. So where does the camera excel? So I know the last kind of section you might be thinking, oh, this is a terrible camera. This is horrible. Why would you use the camera? And I think this is the part where I gotta, kind of come back the other way again. I keep contradicting myself. I guess that's just part of who I am. But so the upsides here, again, the situations that I mentioned, for an athlete running across a frame or doing a lunge jump or flying through the air, that's only that's say 30% of what I shoot. It's probably the most important 30% of what I shoot. It's probably the reason why I get hired the most, but it's also only 30% of what I shoot. So the other 70%, which might be, more of a portrait type based thing, or where the model's not necessarily moving super fast, you're gold. Now you're talking about all upside. Now you're talking about, basically all that image detail and all that great Fuji color science, without any of the, speed problems. I mean, even with my portraits, I still like to operate relatively quickly, getting things set up, but still letting people move and be a bit spontaneous. Because again, what I personally am after is more of those unscripted moments. Not when the model hits, pose A, B, C, or D. I don't want to see that. I'd rather see someone laughing or in the moment, or kind of like getting into the like something that feels real and authentic, as opposed to kind of cataloging. So that's just me. So even my models, I prefer them to be able to move. Even when it's a portrait, I prefer them to be able to move. This camera can keep up with that. This camera, as I said, if you got your setup planned, and you know where people are going to be, and they're not super flying across the screen, you're good. If you're shooting landscapes, architecture, again, subjects that are going to be in one place, you're doing just fine. Portraits, you're just fine. I did a shoot with a NFL legend a couple of weeks ago for a magazine, and that was great. Because again, he's a former NFL player, but he wasn't running. It was more portraits, and it was more about what his life is like now. And so I took this camera along to do that shoot. Well, it made a lot of waves on set, which was fun. People really enjoyed, kind of checking it out, because it is quite cool. But also the shots that I got were really quite, for me, were really quite good. They were creative. They were different than shots that I've taken before. And here's where the quandary kind of continues. Where I was talking about in the previous section, whereas the camera is not great if you like to move very fast. If you or your subject likes to move very fast, which, describes both, me in most cases. So where it doesn't necessarily excel in that situation, but the flip side of slowing you down is I have noticed that the hero shots that I've gotten in the 3 months I've been shooting with this camera are definitely kind of a cut above a lot of the previous hero shots. And the reason being that because I can't operate quite as quickly with the camera, it requires even more forethought on what the final image is going to be, because so many technical things you have to, kind of accomplish in order to make sure that everything's in focus. Everything is just, is really kind of tack sharp and everybody's good to go. So because of that, it makes you think about the frame a little bit more, which can actually be a good thing, because you end up shooting, portraits and being a little bit more deliberate with your lighting. You end up being a little bit more kind of spot on with your planning and your execution. Everything is slows you down, makes you think about these things, and you can deliver a great creative image that, while technically I could have pulled off with my Nikon or any other camera, I don't feel like my brain just wouldn't necessarily have gone there. My brain would have gone maybe to the easier, quicker thing to do. It'll make you actually think a little bit more about what you're about to take the picture of. Before you hit that frame and get that big blackout, that clunk. It makes you want to shoot less frames and just kind of dwell on each frame you're shooting. So if you're a photographer who is very meticulous, if you're a photographer who takes a lot of time and goes very slowly and works very methodically, this camera is definitely going to make you quite happy. If if you need to produce, an unconscionable amount of work in a short period of time, which sometimes my clients ask me to do, actually ask me to do that quite a bit, then this camera might just be a little too slow. It prevents you from working faster. It prevents you from getting kind of some of those more in-between moments, which is what I like. I like to get this kind of instinctual moments. So a lot of those are not as easy to capture with this camera. But when you capture that hero shot, it will be kind of a cut above, technically, than some of the other shots that I'm going to take. So there's your trade-off. Color science. So color science is one of those tricky things. Some people say Canon has the best color science. Some people say Fuji. Some people say Nikon. Not too many people say Sony, but I think Sony shooters will. I think in general, the best color science is generally considered whatever color that you like. It's impossible to really make a declarative statement in terms of who has the best. But I did notice a very kind of interesting thing. Traditionally, I've always shot with a Nikon, and I started shooting with the Fuji medium format, the GFX 100. And one of the things I noticed was that the colors, just something wasn't quite warm enough. In my head, I thought, okay, well, it's the color science. So let me figure out a way to get my Fuji colors closer to my Nikon colors. This is the way I was thinking. So in order to do this, I said, okay, well, I'm gonna set up just a simple shot. Not anything fancy, just a simple shot of a chair that's in my office. And I'm going to take a picture with the Nikon D850, and I'm going to take a picture with this Fuji GFX 100. I'm going to bring both of those images into Capture One, and I'm going to create an adjustment, a custom style in Capture One that will convert the camera, the images that come in from my GFX automatically to the kind of warmer tones that I'm more associated with my Nikon. So that was my plan, right? Simple enough. But then an interesting thing happened. So I get the images in the Capture One, and I'm sitting in my office right next to the picture of the chair in my office that I just took a picture of. And I'm looking at the Fuji image, and I'm looking at the Nikon image, and I realize that the Nikon image, which I just over the years I've grown to think that this is right, it was actually a lot warmer and had a lot more kind of yellow tones in it than what was actually there. Whereas the Fuji image, and again, I'm the chair's there, the image is there. I'm looking at it. The Fuji image was, it was like I was looking at real life. It's like good, like the colors. The color was so spot on, and they were, by the way, they both had the same white balance. They had the same settings. Everything was the same. But the Fuji color, they were just so much more accurate. And it was funny because I'd gone through all this to try to make the Fuji colors to me feel more accurate. But in actuality, what was happening is, I guess I just been shooting with Nikons for so long that my brain subconsciously, you think of as whatever their color science is, I think of that as correct. So I kind of instinctively think that way. But in actuality, it wasn't correct. It was actually a little bit on the warm side, which may be good, because I kind of like it. So what was actually normal, what was actually happening in the world was actually kind of a little bit bluer. And so that was kind of interesting. If you're shooting a project and your ideal is to get colors spot on and everything exactly, let's say you're shooting, your client has like a red garment and it needs to be exactly that shade of red, the GFX 100 is definitely going to do a great job for you. You know, if you have a little bit more room to play, which you usually can have a little bit more room to play, but if you have a little bit more room to play, you know, and you can, and I should also point out that you can get any camera to look like another camera's color science. So it wouldn't be hard to make my Nikon look more like this or this more like my Nikon. But it was interesting because, you know, the colors in the camera, they're spot on. Like, yeah, they're spot on. So what about video? Yeah, no. Actually, I take that back. The video actually out of this camera is fantastic. You're using basically entire medium format sensor to capture, you know, a 4K image, and it's quite, you know, it's good. It's very, very good. There's only one problem, and it's really not a problem with the camera itself. It's a problem with the lenses. So this critique is not about the camera body itself. The camera body itself does a fantastic job, and these lenses are immaculately sharp. You know, so if you're looking for sharpness and image detail, especially in the still world, you're taken care of. The only reason I say no right now in terms of using it for video primarily, I mean, you can use it for video. I've shot a lot of clips with it for video, but if you're looking to really, really use it a lot for video, it's got one major drawback, and that is that the lenses that are available for the system right now, they breathe when they focus. And if you don't know what that means, it means, you know, when you change your focus within the frame, the size of the frame changes. You know, so that basically it zooms in and out a little bit as you're getting focus. Now the problem with that is, again, you know, if you're looking at your footage and you've got this long, beautiful tracking shot and everything's going great and smooth, and then all of a sudden the frame goes, it just, you know, it takes the viewer just right out of it. Like what just happened? I had the 32 to 64. I've got the 45, the 110, and the 63. And as far as I can tell, they all do that focus breathing. So it kind of takes it out for me in terms of video, unless I want to manually focus. And again, manually focusing is terrific in this camera. So if I can focus on a spot and just say, okay, everything can happen at that spot, and then I don't have to worry about the autofocus taking control, that's an option. That's kind of a workaround to the breathing situation. But if you want to be in autofocus all the time, you know, with taking your video clips, I would really kind of use it mostly for just like short video clips. Again, nothing that's going to be thrown off, or like an interview, for example, you could probably do because somebody's going to be in the same spot. But if they move around a lot and then the frame starts to go poof, 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 then, you know, it's not really going to be a good situation. So for that, I find more than likely than not, I just use this camera for stills. And then for video, I'll just use my X-T3. Or, you know, my bigger video cameras. But, you know, in the Fuji world, I'll just use my X-T3 because it has this, you know, basically the videos are pretty much identical. There's not really any drop off in image quality using the X-T3. And the X-T3 has a couple lenses that don't breathe. So you're able to kind of get more of a cinematic experience. So how is it in low light? Surprisingly, not that bad. I did a shoot out at this location here in Los Angeles, where I won't say anything on YouTube, but let's just say we're not necessarily supposed to be there. The idea was to shoot kind of like at magic hour, but, you know, as always happens when you shoot at magic hour, the model was running late, and so I basically ended up shooting the vast majority of the shoot and basically in pitch black, with only using available lights, street lights, and lamps and neon signs. It turned into an interesting experiment of kind of figuring out exactly how far I could push this camera in low light and still get some really kind of high quality images. And it turned out really well. I mean, you know, autofocus struggled a little bit at night, but that's, I think every camera, autofocus struggles a lot at night. So that, I mean, I wouldn't say it was any better or worse than any other, you know, camera you might be using. But, you know, again, the dynamic range was really, really good. So, you know, sometimes I was able to kind of underexpose certain images to make sure to keep, you know, sharp, and I didn't have to drag my shutter too much, but at the same time be able to pull up that detail and capture one and still be able to get, you know, a lot of detail in there. 6400 starts to look a little grainy, so I usually about 3200 is safe. 6400, you start to see some grain. It's not horrible grain. I mean, it's usable. You know, and if in a pinch that's what you need, that's what you need. You'll be taken care of. And again, you won't really see it unless you're printing super big. But yeah, I would say 3200 is the ideal place to top out at. 6400 is starts to get a little grainy, and I haven't even I haven't even tried to go any further than that, just because I feel like it's not going to look very good. But I said as long as you can stay around set 3200 with your settings, with your ISO setting, I think you'll be fine. I think you'll be happy. I mean, I don't know that this is the first camera I would turn to for low light shooting, but if you are in a situation where you need to shoot in low light, you'll be taken care of. So what are the biggest takeaways? So the best parts of the GFX camera, the image quality is just second to none. It's got good autofocus for its class. Staying on focus, the manual focus assist tools are fantastic. I mean, usually I never use manual focus on this camera. I use it quite a bit. The main benefit of the 100 megapixels is that there's an infinite number of crops. You can take one image and create 5 out of just one image, just by how you want to crop it and how you want to use it. And because of 102 megapixels, you can crop in very tight and still have enough to print something very large. The color accuracy is second to none. Like what you're seeing with your own eyes is exactly what the sensor is going to see in terms of color. So if your job requires you to get colors exact, there are not many better tools. The lenses for stills are just really tack sharp. When you get your focus spot on, I mean, it is spot. I mean, you can cut the edges of that image with a knife. I mean, it's that sharp. It is by far the most versatile medium format camera on the market. There's advantages to the larger, more expensive Hasselblads and Phase 1 systems. So they do have slight advantage in terms of sensor size, and again, because of that blackout issue I mentioned earlier, they can be a little easier to use in that sense. They're a little better for me in some ways. But in terms of just versatility, I mean, there are not many medium format cameras that you're gonna want to do just street photography with, or go out and shoot a somewhat dark environment in, or shoot. There's so many different subjects you can shoot with this, and will want to shoot with this, that you're just not gonna want to do with any other medium format camera on the market. It inspires me, and I realize that's a very subjective and non-tangible thing. The thing about this camera, it can be frustrating in some ways because of things like the blackout, things like I want to be able to move faster, and this is slowing me down. But the thing about this camera is that it inspires me to want to go out and shoot. If I was going out for like a walk on the beach or something like that, where it'd be great to take like a little small mirrorless lightweight camera, I'm reaching for this thing. I just want to shoot with it. Or certain jobs where the subject is going to be just moving 100 miles an hour, and it makes no sense in the world to take this out instead of shooting it with my Nikon. I'm still trying to find a way to shoehorn this into the shoot somehow. It's got that kind of draw that makes you really, really want to work with it, despite some shortcomings. The inspirational quality is one of those that you can't really quantify, and your mileage may vary, but it's there. It's real. The desire to want to work with it, it's real. The bad. Well, now it's time to flip to the other side of the coin. The autofocus, specifically the continuous autofocus, while single point and manual focus really quite excels, the continuous autofocus, simply as a result of the size of the lenses and how much needs to be moved, is not great for what I shoot. Again, if you're shooting fairly stationary subjects, you're golden. But I find that even for, if I'm working with a particularly active model, who's giving me, 42 different looks a minute, in order to keep up with her, usually I'm staying on the single point as opposed to trusting my continuous to be able to keep track of her. And the focus breathing for video. For stills, you're never going to notice, so that's not going to make any difference to you at all. But for video, if you want to do a lot of autofocus for video, the lenses that it currently exists kind of flare in and flare out as you focus. So that's not a good thing. That's something that could be fixed in the future if they release a great, kind of cinema geared lens for this system. So I can't really hold that against the camera. It's just something to think about. And the ugly. Well, it's really only the one thing, which to me is a very big thing, again, because of how I shoot. But it's also something that is a problem that's shared between a lot of mirrorless cameras, and that is blackout. The viewfinder blackout. I am having the hardest time trying to get used to that, mainly because my biggest strength as a photographer is capturing motion. It's one of those things like I feel like it's like, should I even be worried about mirrorless at all, or should I just stick with my DSLR? Which maybe I should just stick with my DSLR. But I think that's really the biggest kind of like thing for me. And again, I mean, I point out that the blackout for the GFX 100 is the same as like the GFX 50S. I had the GFX 50S for like 3 months and didn't really even notice it. So it's not like the blackout's that big of an issue. It was only became an issue when I started trying to use the GFX 100 professionally and trying to really use it, in the same way that I would choose my normal A camera, which is to be able to, shoot quickly, rapidly, and to be able to, once again, not only capture that moment, but be able to track instantly be ready to track the motion to catch the next moment. That's really the hardest part for me in using this camera as my camera full time, is just that blackout thing. It's just driving me crazy. And unfortunately, I don't think that's something that is going to ever really necessarily get fixed via firmware or anything like that. So it's something I'm working around. But yes, that is by far my least favorite part of the camera. My most favorite part is the image quality. My least favorite part is the blackout. So should you buy this camera? Well, it depends. I mentioned some of these situations before, but it really depends on what you shoot, how you shoot, and how you like to work, and most importantly, where are your images going to end up realistically. First question: are you going to print your work? If you're not going to print your work, then I've done enough side-by-side tests between this, even my XT3, which is APS-C size sensor, to know that if you're only going to be living digitally online, you don't need this camera. Second question you have to ask yourself: are you like a slower, more methodical shooter, or are you kind of like just like shoot like a crackhead like I do? You're just shooting as fast as possible. When inspiration hits, just go, 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 go. If you're a slow, methodical shooter, you cannot pick up a better camera for the price than this. If you like to kind of go and be more instinctual, you can use this camera, but you're definitely gonna miss a few of those kind of in-between magic moments that you wouldn't probably miss with a DSLR. So I think if you're really kind of carefully and well thought out and you want to capture something very, very specific, great camera for you. If you want to be more instinctual, again, compared to other medium format cameras, it's very versatile and quick. What's the value of an image? At the beginning of this video, I talked about how, if you have an iPhone, you can create a great shot. The great shot's not all about the technical from time to time. And so sometimes having all the power at your hands to be able to work with a tool like this, it will give you the power to create the images you want in the most technically amazing way. But if the technology slows you down from capturing that magic moment, what's better, to get that magic moment on a 12 megapixel camera, or to get a slightly less magical moment, but with 100 megapixels and an incredible amount of detail? That's, you can only answer that question for yourself, whether or not you find that's valuable or not. For me, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends. The really, kind of hard thing about, deciding whether or not to invest your money in a camera system or not is that you really can never know how good a camera is or isn't until you decide to use that camera for yourself. And you have to be able to use it for an extended period of time too. That's the thing. You can't just, you can rent it for a day and you're like, oh, this is great. But you really have to kind of put it in situations, tough situations, such situations that it wasn't even built for, to really figure out, if it's going to work for you, to really figure out, if it's going to be part of your major workflow. And so I would strongly suggest any of you out there considering buying this or any other camera for that matter, I would strongly suggest that you go and you really try to get your hands on it for a long time, as long as possible, and really put it into situations that are going to be tough for your workflow and find out if it's, if it's the right camera for you. So after 3 months, is it the camera for me? That, as you might guess, is a little bit of a hard question to answer. I love shooting with the camera. As I said, it's still the camera that I want to shoot with as much as I possibly can. It's a camera that I just want to sit here and hold. It's a camera that I want to talk about on YouTube because I just love shooting with this thing so much. That's the heart side of photography. The head side of photography is the blackout in the viewfinder really makes it difficult for me to do my specific job, which is to capture fast moving subjects rapidly. Autofocus makes it very difficult for me to make sure that all my shots are tack sharp. It's not impossible. It just means I have to work in a different way, and again, have to alter the way I shoot in order to make sure everything is going to be technically tack sharp, and I'm taking advantage of those 102 megapixels. On one side, the hero images that have come out, I love. I mean, there's some stuff that can go straight to my portfolio, just right there. I mean, like just the instant they come off the camera, just print it right into my book. But then again, I've also missed a lot of images where just little in between moments were happening, and I couldn't grab focus quickly enough. I couldn't get the thing to move fast enough to get that little moment that might not have been as well thought out as the other shots, but that little magic impromptu moment is sometimes where the magic happens. Again, I don't know what the value is between those two things. So where I'm at right now is I'm basically in a situation where, my intention was to use the GFX 100 for all of my work. Was just from now on, just go forward with that, slowly transition out of my Nikon system and move into this. Ironically, what's happened is shooting with this has made me do two things. One, made me really enjoy, shooting with this, but it's also really made me appreciate my Nikon, and specifically appreciate old DSLRs with just an optical viewfinder where I can just see what's actually happening clearly and just, and not have to worry about anything getting in the way of anything getting between me and the subject. And it's weird. It's just weird because I don't know if that's not like again, it's not a technical thing. And again, this is not a technical spec review. It's in terms of, my experience shooting it in the real world and how, the experience of actually shooting it feels. And so there's something to be said for being able to just, my 2-year-old, Nikon D850 and being able to work with that. So, again, whereas my heart may be like, oh, I love shooting with this camera and I love the images, it's great. My head is also kind of goes on the side of, well, practically speaking, the old Nikon, will be able to keep up, with people on autofocus. You'll be able to shoot with fast moving subjects. You'll be able to shoot quicker. You'll be able to, so from a practical standpoint, that makes more sense. From a emotional standpoint, this makes more sense. And then looking at the results of the final two, though, they both cameras create great images just differently. The Nikon allows me to be a little more freewheeling, a little more improvisational. The Fuji GFX 100 allows me to, when I get that hero shot, wow, it's good. Like it's really good. So it's answer the question right now. I kind of have the two camera splitting time in my bag. So I literally have, and depending on what it is I'm shooting, I'll reach for one or the other. I start with this one in mind. I try to get this one into the game. But then, if I did a shoot like a little while ago where I was on the beach and I was going to be kind of freewheeling and I wanted to capture this dancer with a lot of motion, a lot of movement, something like that. I didn't even bother to think about taking this because I knew I wanted to be more freelance, and I wanted to kind of be able to experience the moment and live in the moment. So for something like that, the Nikon side of the bag came out for things like shooting NFL stars in their homes in very specific lined up settings. then I'm gonna reach for the Fuji GFX 100. So I wish I could give you a more definitive answer than that, but unfortunately, that's really kind of the answer to where I am right now after 3 months. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, it'd be interesting to see where you are after a year, and that will be interesting. I'll try to come back and give you another update at that point. Um, but yeah, no, it's an interesting camera system. The other day a friend of mine asked me, so I guess he had some money came to him, and he was considering buying either the Sony A7 IV or the GFX 100, and he knew I had the GFX 100. He knew I shot actually with the Sony A7 III. I haven't shot with the 4 yet, and I've obviously been shooting with this camera, and he was trying to get some advice on what would be the better investment. And it was a tough question to answer because it depends again on what you're shooting. So like if you're just shooting for fun, then you want to get the best camera you can get, and then knock yourself out, have a good time. If you're making your living via photography, then you have to think about every camera choice as an investment. Will it make my job easier to do? And what is you have to put some kind of numerical value on that and figure out if it's worth it or not. So his choices obviously were between the Sony A7R4 and then this camera. So the A7R4 is obviously probably going to be about half the price. Once you factor in lenses, I realized that it's probably about half the price of what this camera would be. My answer with him was, as I love shooting with the GFX 100. It's my one of my favorite cameras to shoot with. So if I'm buying this just for the love of the game, I'm probably going to get that. From a practical standpoint, I know the Nikon D850, so I'm assuming probably like the Sony A7R4 might make more practical sense in the sense that it will be able to do more things, cost less money, and will probably be easier to use for high volume work. But again, that's not necessarily a definitive answer. It's still a matter of, what do you like holding in your hand the most and what do you like shooting with the most? It really depends on your circumstances, both financially and in terms of what you shoot and how you shoot. How do you put a value on inspiration? When I think about this projects that I've shot in the last couple months with this camera, or sometimes because of this camera, I've created projects to shoot just because I wanted to shoot with it. Where do you put a value on that? How do you put a price tag on a camera that just makes you want to go out and create? I don't know that you can. And then, of course, by going out to create, you end up creating stuff that you're really proud of, and almost inevitably, that's the type of stuff that gets you more work in the future. So it is actually an investment in that regard. But again, can you do that with a full frame camera or an APS-C size sensor or an iPhone or a old film point and shoot? Yes, you absolutely can. So it's just a matter of, kind of what drives you, what influences you, and what makes you kind of want to get out there and be creative. So again, my main recommendation after shooting with it for 3 months would be to rent this camera for as long as you possibly can. A month at least, maybe. Rent it for a month, take it into all your shoots, figure out if it's the one for you. And after that, if after the long rental period, you find you're still wanting to shoot with it, it's probably the right camera for you. If after that time you find yourself wanting to chuck it over a bridge and go back to shooting with, your DSLR or your mirrorless camera or your 35mm full frame mirrorless camera, then it probably isn't the right one for you. But hopefully sharing my own experience is giving you some idea of what it's like to use in the real world, as opposed to just me reading off a spec sheet. Hopefully I give you some idea of how the camera really excels and how it somewhat comes up short, and how certain situations is fantastic, certain situations not so good. You have to take that and then kind of interpret that through the way you like to shoot and what's important to you, and make your own decision. So thank you for watching. I realize that my reviews tend to be a little bit longer than most reviews on YouTube, partially because I like to ramble, but also because I think whenever I'm shopping for a product, I'm really want to know, how does it operate in the real world? Like, I want to know the bad things that I haven't thought about beforehand. And I want to know the good things that I haven't thought about beforehand, so I can really make a wise decision. You know, for example, like if I had thought more about the blackout issue before I bought the camera, would I have still bought the camera? I don't know. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But then again, until I had the camera, I didn't know things, you know, like exactly how accurate, how much of a difference that accurate color would make, how the images that, you know, you can kind of create with it, and how they really do feel like a world in and of themselves. It's one of those things you kind of have to have in your hand to experience. And today I'm just trying to share with you some of the upsides and downsides of the camera that'll hopefully make your purchasing decision, you know, easier or perhaps more difficult. As I said, my name is Christopher Malcolm. I'm a lifestyle, fitness, and activewear photographer here in Los Angeles. I don't usually do a lot of gear reviews on this channel, but every now and then I like to pop in and talk to my fellow photographers and tell them about specific pieces that are going to get me excited. Other than that, you can see a lot of my work here or on my website. If you like videos like this, hit that subscribe button. I'll be sure to kind of come back and give you periodic updates on the camera and tell you more about, you know, what I've shot with it. I'd like to hear more about what you're shooting. So until then, happy shooting.